They quietly pulled a 73-year-old black woman off a flight. Because a flight attendant felt uneasy, what they didn't know, she was the mother of the woman holding a $5 billion deal over their heads. Marian Dupree didn't like to fly, but she loved her grandbabies. More than anything, that's why she always pushed through the hassle of airport security and those tight rows of airplane seats. She had just spent 10 days in San Diego reading bedtime stories, cooking big breakfasts, and letting her knees ache after too many rounds of hide and seek. Now, she was on her way back home to Birmingham, Alabama. With a short layover in Phoenix, she walked slowly down the jet bridge at gate 26, holding on to the railing with one hand and her floral printed carry-on with the other. She wore a lavender cardigan over a white blouse, soft beige slacks, and a pair of orthopedic shoes her daughter teased her about. On her head was a silk head wrap tied neatly. Like always, a younger flight attendant at the door smiled politely, then quickly turned her attention to the couple behind Marian. Marian didn't take it personally. She was used to being invisible. She found her seat 15 to see an aisle. She took her time, settling and placing her purse beneath the seat and folding her cardigan across her lap. She liked to be ready, even if the air conditioning was too cold or the snacks took too long. The plane was about halfway full, quiet, peaceful. Even she glanced out the window toward the tarmac and let her shoulders rest. A soft smile crossed her lips as she thought about the hugs from that morning, her grandson's hand clutching hers at the terminal, refusing to let go until the gate agent called her name. But then, just before the flight attendant began the safety demonstration, Marian noticed two uniformed security agents walking down the aisle. She assumed they were handling an unruly passenger behind her, maybe someone who didn't want to wear their mask, or a mix-up over a seat assignment. Instead, they stopped at her row. "Ma'am," one of them said, leaning down, his voice low but firm, "we need you to come with us." Marian looked around. "Me? Yes, ma'am. Please gather your things and come with us." She looked to the flight attendant nearby, but the woman wouldn't make eye contact. The other passengers started whispering. Marian sat frozen for a moment, heart thudding in her chest. "Can you tell me why?" she asked, her voice steady. "We've been asked to escort you off the plane. That's all I can say right now. No explanation, no accusation, just asked to leave." Marian took a breath, picked up her cardigan, and reached under the seat for her purse. She could feel every eye watching. Her palms trembled, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. She walked with them, one step at a time, back down the aisle, past the stairs and murmurs. No one spoke up. Not one person asked what was happening. Back at the gate, they had her sit on a vinyl chair near the counter. A gate agent, barely out of college, stood awkwardly in front of her. There was a concern, the woman said, vaguely flipping through something on her tablet. "The flight crew didn't feel comfortable. They said your behavior was irregular." Marian stared at her. "I boarded. I sat in my seat. I didn't even ask for water yet." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the agent replied, clearly uncomfortable. "That's just what we were told." Marian looked around again. The other passengers were gone now. The plane had left. She was alone. There was nothing loud or dramatic about it, just a quiet removal, a moment of discomfort for others that somehow became her problem. She took out her phone and dialed her daughter's number. Rochelle picked up in the middle of her third meeting of the day, expecting a routine goodbye call. But as soon as she heard her mother's voice, something in Rochelle's tone shifted. "Mama, what do you mean they pulled you off the plane?" Marian held her voice together, said, "I made someone uncomfortable. That's all they'd say." There was a long pause. "Stay there," Rochelle said. "Don't talk to anyone else. I'm calling you back in 5. But Marian didn't need 5 minutes to realize something wasn't right, and Rochelle only needed 1 to decide this wasn't going to slide. Marian sat quietly near the far end of the gate area, her phone resting in her lap, her back straight, her eyes forward. She refused to let them see her shaken, but inside her thoughts were tangled. She kept replaying everything, her walk down the jet bridge, the seatbelt buckled the moment the agents tapped her shoulder. What had she done? Had someone mistaken her for another passenger? No one had told her she was disruptive. No one had accused her of anything specific. And yet there she was, off the plane alone. No apology, no explanation, just the weight of everyone else's assumptions sitting on her shoulders. She adjusted her head wrap and looked at the screen above the gate desk. Her original flight was already taxiing. Another flight to Atlanta wasn't scheduled for another 4 hours. Across from her, a young black woman in a gray hoodie and jeans had been watching from a distance. She had seen the whole thing and had started recording just after the agents walked Marian off the plane. Now she crossed over and sat a seat away. Mom, she said softly, I just want to say I'm so sorry. That was wrong. Marian looked over, surprised by the kindness in her voice. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet. I got it on video, the young woman said, holding up her phone. I didn't know what was going on, but it didn't sit right. You weren't yelling or causing any trouble. I didn't even stand up, Marian said. I just sat in my seat like everybody else. The woman nodded. My name is Kiara, by the way. I posted it already. No names. Just what happened. People are already talking about it. Marian wasn't sure how to feel. Part of her wanted to disappear. The other part was tired of being quiet when quiet didn't protect her. Before she could respond, her phone rang again. It was Rochelle. Mama, Rochelle said sharply, are you okay? Are you still at the gate? I'm fine, just waiting. I just got off the phone with someone at the airline. The gate agent said they pulled you because the flight attendant felt uneasy. Marian let the word hang in the air. Uneasy. She said I was behaving irregularly. Marian added, that's the word they used. Did they define that? No, just said I didn't make anyone feel comfortable that I seemed off. Rochelle didn't answer for a few seconds. Her silence was louder than anything else. I need you to stay put, Rochelle said finally. Don't board anything. I'm flying someone in to meet you. You're not getting on another one of their planes, Mama, she continued, her voice level. They don't know who you are. They don't know who I am either, but they're about to. Rochelle didn't yell. She didn't throw accusations over the phone, but her tone shifted into that firm, careful calm that only came out when something snapped. Inside her, back in her downtown office in Charlotte, Rochelle stood alone in a corner conference room. She had stepped out of a strategic planning session with Orion's executive team, the same team that had finalized a $5 billion investment package for the airline just days ago. The contract was already drafted. The ink wasn't even dry. She looked down at her phone and opened the airline's contact list. She scrolled past the corporate liaison and went straight to the name. She never thought she'd meet Alan Trask, CEO. But before dialing, she called her chief of communications, Kayla. She said, I need a clean breakdown of our entire investment with Delta Horizon, everything. Timeline clauses, options for redirection. Rochelle, what happened? They pulled my mother off a flight today. Didn't give her a reason, just said a flight attendant was uncomfortable. Kayla didn't say anything for moment. Then I'll get you the file in 10 minutes. Rochelle hung up and finally called Alan Trask's direct line. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Kiara refreshed her video post. In less than 30 minutes, it had 14,000 views and over 1,200 comments. Most were shocked, many were angry, some had already tagged the airline. A few even recognized Marian from her past community leadership work in Alabama. Mama, Rachel said on a follow-up call, your name's already floating online. Sit tight. They're going to come talk to you again soon, but don't say anything, just sit. Let me handle this. Marian nodded, though her throat felt tight. I've got someone recording nearby, Rachel added. I'm not playing chess with people who refuse to play fair. Marian wasn't used to being protected. She'd spent her whole life being strong, but now she realized she wasn't alone anymore, and the people who made her feel small might have just made their worst mistake. But back at corporate headquarters, the airline's executive team had no idea who they just disrespected or how fast things were about to shift. Rochelle Dupree Hawkins had been calm until she heard the word irregular. That word always came dressed in shadows. It was how people avoided saying what they really meant. It let them sound official, while still being vague enough to duck accountability. She had heard it before on conference calls and closed-door meetings, and now about her own mother. By the time Kayla sent over the investment file, Rochelle had already moved into action. She didn't need to read every clause. She'd been leading the deal since day one, an ambitious $5 billion injection into Delta Horizon Airlines earmarked for infrastructure upgrades, new fleet purchases, and sustainability tech. It wasn't just a contract, it was a partnership, or at least it had been. Rochelle pulled up Alan Trask's direct line and called. It rang 3 times before a clipped voice picked up. This is Alan. Alan, it's Rochelle Dupree Hawkins. Rochelle, good to hear from you, he said, voice-like but wary. Everything on track for the signing next week? No, I'm calling to inform you that Orion will be terminating the agreement. A pause, then laughter. I'm sorry, what I said. We're pulling out effective immediately. Wait, Rochelle, hold on. That's $5 billion in capital you're walking away from. I'm aware, and I want you to be aware that one of your flight attendants had my 73-year-old mother removed from a plane today because they didn't feel comfortable. No violation, no incident, just her presence." Alan's voice lost all its charm. I don't have details on that. I do," she cut in. "You'll have them in writing within the hour. The moment the contract is voided, that funding becomes available. You should no, we've already had interest from your competitors." He started to speak again, but Rochelle wasn't in the mood for negotiation. "This isn't about business anymore, Alan. It's personal. You humiliated the wrong woman." She ended the call without waiting for a reply. Across the city, in a midtown high rise office, Alan set his phone down and ran a hand through his hair. His chief of legal, Gwen Sanderson, sat on the other side of the desk. "Tell me, that didn't just happen," he muttered. Gwen's jaw clenched. "We just lost $5 billion in investment because someone pulled her mother off a plane. Jesus, who? No idea. But find out now." Back at Orion's headquarters, Rochelle was already redirecting her team. She scheduled an internal strategy meeting for the next morning to discuss alternative partnerships. Her assistant sent cancellation notices to the airline's legal department quietly and without drama. Rochelle moved like a surgeon, precise, controlled. She didn't let anger make her sloppy, but her silence carried weight. Her mother, Marian, was still at the airport, now in the care of a hired transportation liaison. Rochelle had flown in from Phoenix on short notice, a woman named Sonia Greer in a tailored charcoal blazer and a badge that made airport security stand a little straighter. Sonia introduced herself gently when she arrived. "Miss Dupree, I'm here on behalf of your daughter. Let's get you somewhere more comfortable." Marian stood slowly, careful not to let the moment sink into her bones. "I'm not sure what all this is," she said, "but I trust my daughter knows what she's doing." Sonia gave a faint smile. "Oh, she knows, and a lot of people are about to learn it too." As they exited the terminal, a reporter was already waiting outside, tipped off by a tweet that had started trending in the past hour. "Miss Dupree," the reporter called out, "can you tell us what happened on flight 482? Sonia stepped between them. "No comment at this time." Marian didn't say a word. She looked straight ahead, not angry, but focused, like a woman who had stopped waiting for the world to do the right thing. Back at Orion, Rochelle received a call from one of the partners at a rival airline who had gotten wind of the fallout. "We heard you're pulling your investment from Delta Horizon," he said cautiously. "Any chance we talk tomorrow?" Rochelle didn't answer right away. "We'll see," she replied. "Right now, I'm busy taking care of something more important than business." She hung up and stared at the skyline through her office window. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Kiara, the woman who had recorded her mother's removal video at 1.2 million views. "Just letting you know, people are asking for your mom's name. I didn't post it, but someone will." Rochelle replied, "Thank you. Please keep the original up. Don't delete it. We're not hiding anything." But the people who thought this would stay quiet, they were about to learn just how loud the truth can get. At Delta Horizon's regional office in Phoenix, a group of employees sat around a cramped conference room table, the walls lined with flight schedules and faded awards. One screen at the front displayed a still image taken from the viral video. Marian Dupree being escorted off the plane, face calm, eyes confused. Everyone in the room was tense. Gwen Sanderson, head of legal, had flown in from the main office to assess the situation firsthand. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled under her chin, and looked at the only person who hadn't spoken yet. Her name was Cheryl Metz, a 32-year-old flight attendant with just under 7 years of experience. Blonde ponytail, corporate-approved lipstick. She sat stiffly, arms folded, glancing down at her lap as if trying to make herself invisible. "Cheryl," Gwen said evenly, "walk me through what happened on flight 482. Cheryl cleared her throat. "The passenger, she boarded normally. I saw her walk down the aisle. She seemed fine at first." Then Cheryl hesitated. "I went back to the galley, came back, and I noticed she was staring, just sitting there, not blinking much." Gwen's brow lifted, staring. "Yeah, not at anything in particular. I don't know, something felt off. I can't explain it." "Did she speak to you, ask for help?" "No, that's the thing. She didn't ask for anything, not even water. Most passengers ask for something by now. She was just quiet." The room was silent. "So," Gwen said slowly, "you had her removed for being quiet?" "I didn't say that," Cheryl replied quickly. "I just followed protocol. When something feels off, we're allowed to report it." I flagged it to the captain. He approved the call. Gwen tapped her pen against the notepad in front of her. Was there any verbal altercation, any physical movement that made you think she was a threat? No. But with everything that's happened in the news, people hiding things, passengers acting strange, it just seemed safer. That word hung in the air like a bad smell from across the room. A senior gate agent named Thomas Ortega finally spoke up. I saw her before boarding. He said she walked. Slow smile when I said hello. Didn't seem like a threat, just a tired grandma. Cheryl shifted uncomfortably. I didn't say she was a threat. I said I felt something wasn't right. You're describing a woman sitting quietly in her seat. Gwen said no signs of distress, no violations. And now this airline is in a public relations tailspin. Cheryl opened her mouth to speak. Gwen raised a hand. This isn't a trial. You're not being punished. But this is serious and people will want answers. Meanwhile, back in Charlotte, Rochelle was reviewing transcripts of the initial airline report. She read the words irregular behavior 3 times, each more frustrating than the last. They had built an entire internal justification around nothing, a vague subjective discomfort from one flight attendant, no policy broken, no raised voices, just a feeling. Rochelle's phone rang again, this time from her firm's crisis communications director, Monica Reyes. They're trying to contain it, Monica said. Delta Horizon just released a public statement. Out of an abundance of caution, our crew made a difficult decision regarding a passenger whose behavior raised concerns. No name, no apology. Very corporate. Posted on our internal feed, Rachel said, and make sure it doesn't look like we're retaliating. Just facts. The money's gone. No drama. Let the public connect the dots. Yes, ma'am. While Rachel handled the strategy, her younger brother, Julius Dupree, was already watching the news coverage roll in. He lived in Tempe, just 30 minutes from the airport, and had decided to drive to Marian himself. Hey, mama, he said, wrapping her in a hug as she stepped out of the hotel shuttle. You good? I'm fine, baby. I'm just tired. You look good, he said, forcing a grin. World's watching you right now. Marian sighed. I didn't ask for that, I know. But you didn't ask for this either. She gave him a small smile. True enough, as they sat down to dinner that night, Marian's phone buzzed with a new notification. This time, it was Rochelle. I saw the statement. They're trying to spin it. Let them. We're not going to war. We're telling the truth. Marian stared at the screen, then handed the phone to Julius. You read it. My eyes are too tired. Julius chuckled. Mama, the world is about to know exactly who you are. But Cheryl Metz still didn't see what she'd done, and by the time the airline tried to walk it back, the damage had already slipped beyond their control. Alan Trask wasn't used to being blindsided. At 56, with over 2 decades in aviation leadership, he thought he'd seen every kind of crisis, mechanical failures, strikes, even a mid-air lawsuit between 2 pop stars. But this was different. His phone hadn't stopped vibrating since Rochelle ended the call. His inbox was overflowing. The video was everywhere now. National outlets had picked it up, along with a handful of quiet mentions of Orion's strategic partners pulling a major investment. The specifics weren't out yet, but everyone in his circle knew what that meant. He sat alone in his office at headquarters in Mesa, Arizona, staring at the phone like it might give him a second chance to say the right thing. His assistant poked her head in. Alan, Gwen's online too. And the board wants an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. East Coast. He nodded, but didn't respond. Instead, he picked up his direct line and dialed Rochelle's number again. It went straight to voicemail. He tried her office, same result. She was gone for the day, and he had the sinking feeling she was never coming back. In another wing of the building, Gwen was already pacing during her call with Steve Hendricks, the airline's head of corporate risk. She didn't just pull the deal, Steve, Gwen said. She ripped it out by the root. No press release, no warning. Just walked out mid-negotiation. She's going to give that money to someone else, and it's going to look like a moral decision, not a financial one. Steve sighed. What do? We have to talk to her in person. If not to fix it, at least to slow it down. She's not answering. Gwen paused, then lowered her voice. Get her mother's file, the full record. I want to know everything from gate check-in to the moment she stepped off that plane back in. Charlotte. Rochelle was at home, sitting at her kitchen counter with her laptop open. Her kids were upstairs getting ready for bed. Her husband, Terrence Hawkins, leaned on the counter across from her, arms folded. She's trending worldwide, he said, scrolling his phone. That clip is everywhere. I know, Rachel replied without looking up. News anchors are calling her the dignified grandmother. They're turning her into a symbol. Rachel exhaled. I don't want her to be a symbol. I want her to be treated like a person. Terrence stepped around the counter and kissed the top of her head. You made the right call. She doesn't care about the money, Terry. But I do, because money is how you speak in their world. And now we've spoken. She opened a file on her screen, the breakdown of the next best airline candidate, a rival carrier with a better sustainability model, but a shakier public image. Still, Rochelle wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for integrity, or at least accountability. At that moment, her phone buzzed again. It was Gwen Sanderson. Ms. Dupree Hawkins. Gwen began, professional but cautious. I'm calling on behalf of Delta Horizon. We understand that your experience today was deeply upsetting. I didn't have the experience, Rochelle said, her voice. Even my mother did. Yes, of course, and we're taking it seriously. We're launching a full internal review, and we'd like to speak with you directly. I'm not interested in a review, Rochelle replied. I'm interested in results. We're willing to issue a public apology. This isn't about apologies. This is about choices your people made. Theirs now. I've made mine. Is there any scenario in which we could revisit the partnership? Rochelle paused. No, the line was quiet. Gwen cleared her throat. Understood. Rochelle hung up and turned her attention back to the screen. Terrence watched her. You sure you're ready for what comes next? I've been ready, she said. I just needed a reason. Later that night, Marian, back at her hotel, scrolled through an article on her iPad. It featured her photo taken from Kiara's video, and the headline read, Black woman removed from plane without cause. Turns out she's the mother of $1 billion power broker. Marian shook her head. I'm just your grandmother, she whispered to herself. But she wasn't, not anymore. But the airline still believed they could control narrative, unaware that the public wasn't waiting for them to speak. They were already writing the story themselves. At 603:00, and the boardroom at Delta Horizon's Mesa headquarters was already full. The mood was tense. Pressed suits, burnt coffee, and the heavy quiet of damage control. Alan Trask entered last, his tie slightly crooked, a folder tucked under one arm. He nodded once and went straight to the head of the table. We've got a real problem, he began, and it's moving faster than we can. Gwen Sanderson had been up most of the night compiling everything. Marian Dupree's flight history, gate check-ins, seating assignments, crew reports. It was all there. And it was all damning. There was no security breach, no passenger complaint, no policy violated, just the vague discomfort of a flight attendant who felt something was off. Gwen slid a folder across the table. Her removal wasn't grounded in anything objective. We can't hide behind protocol on this one. Across from her, Chief Communications Officer Leon Baxter adjusted his glasses and tapped his tablet. We're not just looking at a pulled investment, he said. We're looking at brand damage. We're already being accused of profiling. That video's past 10 million views overnight, someone at the table muttered. She didn't even say a word. Leon continued. Her daughter hasn't spoken publicly yet, but the public's putting it together once they realize who Marian Dupree's family is. This isn't going to be a PR issue. It's going to be a cultural one. Alan leaned forward. We need to get ahead of it, make a statement, full apology, transparency. Gwen shook her head. It's too late for that. To fix this, they've already walked. They're reallocating the $5 billion. She gave us a shot to do better. We missed it. One of the board members, Stuart Lang, cleared his throat. How did we not know who she was? She didn't book under her daughter's name. Gwen said, no assistant, no flag. She came through like anyone else. Maybe that's the issue. Another member, Cynthia Wu, added. We're so used to spotting high-value clients by title, dress, or how loud they're in the lounge. She didn't fit the mold, so no one looked deeper. Leon exhaled, and now the world knows. Across the room, Alan turned to his assistant. Call Cheryl Metz. Bring her here. 10 minutes later, Cheryl stood awkwardly at the back of the boardroom, her uniform neat, but her posture tight. Miss Metz, Alan began. Walk us through your decision again. Cheryl glanced around at the faces. Older, sharper, less forgiving than the HR manager she'd spoken to the day before. I already gave my statement, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Give it again, Gwen replied. Cheryl swallowed hard. I saw her sitting in her seat. She was just sitting. She didn't make eye contact, didn't respond. When I walked past, it felt strange. That's all. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just escalated it. And that escalation cost us the biggest private investment we've ever had. Stewart said bluntly. Did you ever consider that people, especially older passengers, might just be quiet? I was following my gut, Cheryl Muttered, well, your gut made $1 billion mistake. Gwen snapped. Alan raised a hand, signaling the questioning was done. Cheryl, you're on administrative leave effective immediately. Cheryl's face drained of color. Wait, what I did, what we were trained to do. You exercise poor judgment, Gwen said, and now we're all paying for it. After Cheryl was escorted out the room, sat in silence. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking. This wasn't just a moment, this was going to stick. They had made a woman invisible, and it had blown up in their face because she turned out to be someone important. But the truth was harsher. She was important either way. Back in Charlotte, Rochelle stood on her back patio watching the sun come up over the trees. Her phone rang again. It was a reporter this time. She didn't answer. She was done talking. The story was out now. It belonged to everyone else inside the house. Her mother was sipping coffee at the breakfast table, wrapped in her robe. The kids came downstairs, still half asleep, and hugged her before school. Grandma, her youngest, whispered, "You're famous." Marian smiled faintly. "That's not always a good thing, baby. But you didn't do anything wrong, no. But sometimes it doesn't matter." But in Delta Horizon's offices, where reputation had always been king, they were learning the hard way that public trust can't be bought and silence can't always protect you. By midday, the story had legs, and it wasn't walking, it was sprinting. The clip of Marian Dupree being calmly escorted off the plane had spread to every major social media platform. By the time the noon broadcasts hit, the headline had shifted. It was no longer just about a passenger removed out of caution. Now it had a face, a name, and a backstory that no one could ignore. Elderly black woman removed from plane without cause. Her daughter pulls 5 bulldozes investment from Airline. That was the line running beneath the footage on cable news. The moment where Marian asked, "Is it because I'm black?" was clipped and shared. Like a modern call to awareness, it was simple, measured, not shouted, and because of that, it hit even harder on Twitter. Hashtags like hashed flying while black, hash Marian Dupree, and hash to Delta disrespect were trending. Everyone had an opinion, some calling for boycotts, others demanding resignations. Rachel hadn't said a single word to the press. She didn't need to. Kiara, the young woman who had posted the original video, had become an overnight voice in the conversation. She did an interview with a national radio show that morning. Her voice cracked slightly as she described the moment Marian was asked to leave. "I've flown that airline dozens of times," she said. "I've seen people argue, throw fits, push back against staff, and they never got pulled like that. But Marian, she just sat there calm, quiet. And they said she made someone feel unsafe." She paused. "If that's how we define a threat, now we've got a bigger problem than just one airline." Meanwhile, in Montgomery, Alabama, Marian's hometown, several community leaders who had known her for years began speaking up. Church friends, former school colleagues, even parents from back when she ran a community reading program in the 90s. They told the press about a woman who spent her whole life quietly serving others, never asking for praise. A local pastor, Reverend Otis Daniels, gave a short but emotional statement outside New Hope Baptist Church. "We've watched Marian raise children, mentor young people, and feed neighbors who didn't have enough. If she can't sit on a plane in peace, what message are we sending about who gets to feel safe in public spaces?" The sound bite hit local news before going national. Inside her Charlotte home, Marian watched it all play out on her living room TV. Rochelle sat beside her, her face unreadable. "I didn't want all this," Marian said. "I know," Rochelle replied. "I just wanted to go home." Rochelle reached over and gently held her mother's hand. "You are home." But the truth was, their quiet family moment was now part of something bigger. Rochelle had refused interviews, but journalists weren't letting up. Media vans were camped near her office. Editorials were running with headlines like "Power Meets Principle: Why One CEO Walked Away from $5 billion When Dignity Isn't Enough." The Marian Dupree story. Terrence had even fielded a call from a producer asking if Marian would consider sitting down for a televised special. He didn't bring it up. Neither of them were chasing spotlights. In Mesa, Delta Horizon's crisis team scrambled to regain control. A public statement was rushed out, awkwardly phrased, and painfully late. "We regret the events that took place involving Miss Marian Dupree on Flight 482. While our team followed standard safety procedures, we acknowledge that the experience fell short of our values. We are conducting a full internal review and are committed to doing better." Rachel saw it when it hit her inbox, forwarded by Kayla. She Read it once, then closed the email. Too polished, she said aloud, too vague. They're still protecting themselves. Marian, hearing this, didn't respond. She looked at the folded statement printout on the table in front of her. Then she slid it away. I've been dismissed before, she said. Just louder this time. Outside the house, a few neighbors had started leaving flowers and handwritten notes on the front step, not for sympathy, but respect. One note read, "Thank you for standing tall without needing to raise your voice." Inside, Rochelle opened her laptop and clicked through a list of proposals. One from a smaller airline was sitting at the top. They had called the same day. The story broke. Their email subject line simply read, "We see you," but across town reporters weren't done chasing headlines, and the next morning they were about to hear from Marian herself, whether she planned it or not. The next morning, the phones at Delta Horizon's investor relations office rang. Like fire alarms, no one had slept. The buzz had turned into movement, and the markets didn't wait for statements. Shares dipped hard before the opening bell, and analysts were already whispering about board pressure, stockholder unrest, and long-term trust loss. Major outlets had moved past the story's emotional center and were now targeting the financial wound. Five and beer vanishes, how a CEO's silence cost Delta Horizon everything, blared across the ticker on a major financial news network. Talking heads argued over the fallout. Was Rochelle overreacting? Could the airline recover? Was this the beginning of a broader reckoning in corporate America? Meanwhile, at a community center in Birmingham, a local station had asked Marian if she would sit down for a short piece. At first, she said no. Then she changed her mind, but not because she wanted the attention. Because she was tired of letting others tell the story. She wore a powder blue blouse and a pair of simple pearl earrings Rochelle had given her years ago. The interview was recorded in a quiet, sunlit room. No flashing lights or makeup team, just a single camera, a local reporter named Elisa Trent, and a woman who had lived too long to sugarcoat anything. Elisa asked gently, "Miss Dupree, can you tell us what went through your mind when they asked you to leave the plane?" Marian nodded slowly. "I thought maybe they had me confused with someone else. I looked around thinking surely this wasn't real. But then I saw the flight attendant. She wouldn't even look at me. That's when I knew what that they weren't interested in the truth. They just wanted me gone, and I knew if I raised my voice, it would give them a reason to say they were right. So I stayed quiet. But I didn't shrink." Alyssa let the silence settle before asking, "Do you think this would have happened to someone else?" "I think it wouldn't have happened if I didn't look like me." The interview was just 8 minutes long, but once it aired, it exploded online, not because Marian made a scene, but because she didn't. Her calm demeanor made the story hit harder. People saw their mothers, their grandmothers, their teachers. They saw someone who could be in the seat next to them. And that changed everything. Even Wall Street took note. Within hours of the interview airing, rival airlines began issuing their own statements, thinly veiled jabs about respecting all passengers and learning from the mistakes of others. One mid-sized airline, Sky Frontier, quietly issued a press release about a new partnership on the horizon with Orion Strategic Partners. The internet picked it up immediately. Rochelle didn't need to confirm anything. She never made a single public comment. But the business world knew how to read signs. Her silence had become its own language. At Delta Horizon's HQ, Alan Trask stood before a live feed of the company's stock chart. It dipped again, this time sharper. His phone buzzed. Another emergency board meeting. He didn't bother reading the agenda. He already knew what was coming. Back in Charlotte, Rochelle watched the interview with her mother alone in her home office. She didn't cry. She just sat back in her chair and exhaled one slow breath at a time. She hadn't planned to build a movement. She wasn't interested in going viral. She just wanted one thing: for people like her mother to be respected, whether they held power or not. Terrence stepped into the room and leaned against the door frame. "She did good," he said. "She always does," Rachel replied. Meanwhile, Kiara had gained over 50,000 new followers on social media, but she refused to monetize the moment. Instead, she used her page to highlight other quiet acts of exclusion, those that didn't always make the news. She called it in and heard. The internet kept moving, but the core of the story stuck, not because it was flashy, not because it ended in outrage, but because it was real. And while Delta Horizon scrambled to protect what was left of their image, a woman who never raised her voice had quietly changed the terms of respect in an industry that had never seen her coming. 1 week later, Marian Dupree stepped onto a different plane. It wasn't Delta Horizon this time. It was a private jet arranged by Skyfront Air, now quietly partnered with Rochelle's firm. The cabin was clean, quiet, and unbothered by the chaos that had unraveled in the media over the last several days. Rochelle sat beside her, dressed in a navy suit and white sneakers, her version of off-duty. She had turned down 3 interviews, 5 op-eds, and one high-profile panel invitation. She didn't need a stage. She had already spoken in the most effective language corporate America understands. Capital. Marian looked out the window as the jet prepared for takeoff. "You sure this isn't too much?" she asked, adjusting the strap on her purse. "No," Rochelle said. "I owed you this flight years ago." Marian smiled. "I just wanted to go home, and now we're going there in peace." As the plane lifted, Marian exhaled. Finally, no stares, no tension, no whispers, just altitude and light. They were headed back to Birmingham, but only after a short detour. Rochelle had arranged for them to stop in Kansas City first, where a group of young black women in aviation training wanted to meet Marian. They'd been inspired by her story, by her restraint, and by her quiet power. Marian hadn't agreed to it at first. She didn't see herself as a symbol, but Rochelle reminded her symbols don't choose the spotlight. Sometimes they just survive long enough to be seen. At the small airfield in Missouri, a handful of women in navy blue jumpsuits greeted her with flowers and applause. Marian stepped off the jet with calm grace, smiling shyly, still not used to the attention. One of the young women, Ashanti Rivers, stepped forward and extended a hand. "Miss Dupree," she said, "you made us feel visible. Thank you for that." Marian took her hand and replied gently, "I didn't do anything special. I just sat still and told the truth. That's what made it special." Ashanti said, "You didn't shout, you just let people watch, and they saw something they couldn't ignore." Back inside the plane, Rochelle watched through the window. She didn't interrupt. This wasn't about her anymore. It never really had been. Later, back in Birmingham, Marian walked through her front door, greeted by a few neighbors waiting with pound cake and hugs. Nothing fancy, just love, the kind that comes from people who've known you long enough to understand the weight you carry, even when you're not speaking. That night, as they sat on the back porch, Rochelle scrolled through her emails. One stood out. A young woman from a university in Oregon had written to say she'd shown Marian's interview in her media ethics class. The conversation lasted an hour longer than planned. Students cried not because Marian had demanded sympathy, but because she reminded them of someone they loved. Rochelle didn't reply. She just closed her laptop and turned to her mother, who was sipping hot tea under the porch light. "They're still talking about you," she said. Marian raised an eyebrow. "I'm not running for office." "I know," Rochelle said, smiling. "That's why they believe you." For a long moment, neither said anything, just the sounds of a southern evening humming in the background, distant laughter, a porch swing creaking, the familiar pace of home. Then Marian said quietly, "Do you think it changed anything?" Rochelle leaned back in her chair. "Maybe not everything, but enough." Marian nodded. "Good." Not long after she went inside to bed, Rochelle stayed behind a moment longer, looking out at the backyard, at the worn wooden fence, the trees bending slightly in the breeze. It wasn't victory she felt, it was clarity, the kind that comes when someone tells you to move and you decide not to. But the lesson wasn't just for airlines or executives, it was for anyone who's ever made a decision based on a feeling they couldn't explain. Respect isn't about policy, it's about presence, and sometimes the quietest person in the room has the loudest impact. Some stories burn bright and fade fast, others settle in quiet, but firm, like a stone dropped in deep water, ripples stretching outward long after the splash is gone. Marian Dupree didn't ask for the moment she ended up in. She didn't march, shout, or sue. She didn't demand the camera. She didn't beg for change. She simply refused to be erased. And that refusal, measured, composed, and absolute, became the story. A week after returning home, she was back in her normal routine: morning walk, Sunday church, reading on her porch in the afternoon sun. But something was different. Strangers now recognized her in the grocery store. A young man paid for her coffee and left without a word. Letters kept arriving at her door, some handwritten, others typed, all expressing the same thing: thank you. In Charlotte, Rochelle went back to work. The Skyfront deal was finalized, and within 72 hours of signing, their stock ticked up nearly 4%. Analysts began calling it a values-based partnership. Internally, her team just called it the shift. It marked a new era, one where silence wasn't seen as neutrality, but as complicity on a quiet Wednesday morning, Rochelle stood before a group of Orion interns, mostly first generation college students, and told them the full story, not as a headline, not as a financial play, but as a daughter who got a phone call that stopped her breath for a moment. She didn't yell Rochelle, said she didn't make a scene, and they still removed her not because she was dangerous, but because she made someone uncomfortable without doing anything at all. She paused, then added, "That's what bias looks like. When it's wearing a uniform, it doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers, and if we're not paying attention, we let it walk around dressed as procedure." One intern asked, "Do you think it would have gone differently if she'd reacted more strongly?" Rochelle smiled faintly, "Maybe. But then they'd have called her aggressive. Either way, she loses." That's the trap. Later that evening, back in Birmingham, Marian watched a new segment on TV about airline equity policies. Several airlines had quietly launched new training initiatives. One had even named a scholarship after her for older women pursuing aviation careers late in life. She chuckled softly, "A scholarship with my name on it. I barely made it through algebra." Julia, sitting nearby, grinned. "Yeah, but you made it through life, and that counts more." That night, before heading to bed, Marian stood at her front door for a moment, porch light off, just her, the night air, and a neighborhood she'd lived in for over 40 years. She didn't feel like a symbol. She didn't feel like a headline. She felt like a woman who got off a plane with her dignity intact and didn't have to yell to prove it. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about being seen, being treated like her presence had weight, and maybe, just maybe, leaving the world a little better for her grandkids than it had been for her. Not because the world suddenly became fair, but because she reminded it how far off track it still was. There's a lesson here, one that cuts through boardrooms, airports, classrooms, and dinner tables. Never assume the worth of the person in seat 15. Never underestimate the strength of someone who speaks gently but refuses to disappear. And never think silence means permission. Sometimes the loudest impact comes from the ones who simply refuse to be erased. And if that resonates with you, if you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel smaller than you are, share this story. Let others hear it, because change doesn't always start with a speech. Sometimes it starts with a simple question: is it because I'm black and the world has no answer it can say out loud? If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful human-centered stories, real voices, real emotions, real change.